On a winter morning in Montana during the coldest spell in American history, Evan Carter awoke suddenly to find the thermometer on the porch reading negative 48 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was so cold that every blade of grass and leaf was encased in ice, frozen in an eternal moment. Though Evan, a native of Montana, was accustomed to the cold, this was unlike anything he had ever experienced. His body shivered in response to the harshest temperature he had ever felt. He poured himself a cup of hot coffee and turned on the TV to check the weather, but the howling wind outside soon pulled his attention away from the screen. Standing by the large window and gazing outside, he realized that the wind was so fierce that it was blowing thick layers of snow into swirling white columns. The snow danced and twisted in the wind like ghostly figures in a stormy ballet. But that wasn't all. Just as Evan thought the morning couldn't get any stranger, he dropped his coffee in shock, the hot liquid splattering across the floor. Through the frosted glass, a sight he never expected greeted him. A scene so surreal it felt like a dream. A mother snow wolf crouched against the window frame, her pale silvery white fur glistening in the frost. Her sleek body trembled against the brutal cold, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, 3 tiny snow wolf pups huddled together in a small mount of snow-dusted fur, barely visible against the endless white landscape. Their small bodies quivered violently, their faint whimpers nearly drowned by the howling wind. The smallest pup suddenly collapsed, its frail body twitching weakly as though on the brink of surrendering to the unforgiving elements. But the situation became even more unbelievable. The mother snow wolf, sensing the urgency in the narrowing window of time, carefully lifted the smallest pup by the scruff of its neck and brought it closer to the window. Her movements were deliberate yet gentle, each step radiating a mother's determination. She pressed the tiny pup softly against the glass, her breath fogging the pain as she looked up at Evan. Her eyes full of desperation and hope, silently begged him for help. The wind howled louder, slamming snowflakes against the window with sharp, popping sounds that intensified the sense of desperation. Evan stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never seen anything like this before. The mother snow wolf raised her paw and tapped rhythmically on the window, her claws clicking against the glass. It was as though she was trying to send him a message, pleading with him to understand. Evan hesitated. Bringing wild animals into his home was the last thing he had ever imagined doing. But seeing the collapsed pup, he knew that if he didn't act, it might not survive much longer. He shakily walked to the door, his mind racing with fear and uncertainty, and opened it slightly. And then this happened. The mother snow wolf immediately brought the weak pup to the threshold and gently set it down, stepping back to show she posed no threat. Her eyes remained locked on Evan's, filled with hope and urgency. He couldn't turn them away. Evan scooped the tiny pup into his arms, its body barely warmer than the ice outside, and carried it inside. The mother snow wolf watched intently, then directed her gaze toward the 2 remaining pups, still huddled in the snow. She looked up at him again, her pleading expression unmistakable. It got more intense. He opened the door wider, motioning for her to bring the other pups. Without hesitation, she nudged them forward, one by one. Her movements were slow and deliberate. When all 3 pups were inside, Evan hesitated once more. The mother snow wolf stood at the threshold, the snow swirling around her as she waited for his permission. Finally, he nodded, stepping aside to allow her in. She moved with grace but caution, shaking the ice off her fur before stepping fully into the warmth of the house. And here's the truly surprising part. She didn't act like a wild animal at all. It was as though she understood she was a guest. She stayed close to her pups, even brushing against the furniture lightly as if testing her surroundings. Evan quickly gathered blankets, folding them near the fireplace to create a warm nest for the snow wolf family. The mother snow wolf wasted no time nudging her pups toward the heat, using her paws and snout to adjust the blankets, ensuring her little ones were as comfortable as possible. But that's not all. She turned her amber gaze back to Evan, her eyes shining with gratitude that seemed almost human, piercing straight to his soul. He felt a warmth in his chest, a connection he couldn't explain nor deny. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind howling like a pack of wolves on a hunt. But inside, the atmosphere softened, creating a sanctuary against the chaos. The pups, once trembling and weak, began to stir. The smallest, nestled closest to the fire, let out a tiny, pitiful mew. Its first sound since they had arrived. It was faint, but it filled the room with a sense of hope. Evan watched in awe as the mother snow wolf leaned down to lick each of her pups in turn, her rough tongue warming them and coaxing life back into their tiny forms. Despite their wild nature, the pups displayed an astonishing calm. They stayed close to their mother, their wide, curious eyes darting toward Evan occasionally, but without fear. It was as though they understood they were safe, as though they trusted him completely. Time seemed to stretch as Evan observed them. The firelight flickered across their fur, casting a warm, golden glow that contrasted sharply with the icy desolation outside. Every movement of the mother snow wolf was deliberate and tender, her instincts finely tuned to protect and nurture her young. The smallest pup, now steadier on its paws, let out another soft sound, this time more confident, as it curled closer to its siblings. Evan couldn't tear his eyes away, feeling as though he were witnessing something both primal and profoundly sacred. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, an unspoken truce and bond were forming. The mother snow wolf glanced at Evan again, her gaze lingering this time, as though wanting to convey her gratitude in a way words could never match. Evan, still clutching the now-forgotten coffee mug, felt a lump rise in his throat. How could an animal so wild, so inherently fierce, display such gentleness and understanding? The thought left him humbled. He realized in that moment just how extraordinary this encounter truly was. As the hours passed, Evan found himself mesmerized by the scene. The mother snow wolf, ever vigilant, kept one eye on her pups and the other on him. Her demeanor spoke of trust, but also of unyielding protection. It gets even wilder. At one point, she stood up and walked over to the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate. She stopped at the edge of the counter, looking back at him, her ears perked as if asking permission. Evan, understanding her silent request, grabbed a plate and placed a small piece of cooked chicken on it, setting it on the floor. She approached cautiously, sniffed the food, then carried it back to her pups, dividing it among them with the same deliberate care that defined all her actions. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up. Snow piled high against the windows, and the wind continued to howl like a relentless beast clawing at the house. But inside, the warmth from the fireplace and the unusual bond forming between man and beast created a surreal atmosphere. The flickering firelight seemed to cast a spell over the room, softening the edges of reality. It gets worse. Evan realized that by helping the snow wolf family, he had taken on a responsibility far greater than he had anticipated. The fragility of life in the wild had suddenly become very real to him. He couldn't simply let them go back out into the storm. They needed time to recover, and he was their only hope. Over the next few hours, the mother snow wolf continued to amaze him with her behavior. She was careful not to damage anything in the house, even using her paw to nudge a fallen blanket back onto the pile. The pups, now more energetic, began to explore their surroundings. But here's the truly wild part. They didn't act like typical wild animals. They seemed to understand the boundaries of the space, staying close to the fireplace and refraining from climbing or scratching the furniture. Their small paws patted softly against the wooden floor. Their movements were cautious but curious, as if they too understood the sanctity of this temporary sanctuary. Evan couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The intelligence and awareness of the mother snow wolf were unlike anything he had ever seen. She even seemed to communicate with him through her body language, tilting her head or flicking her tail to express her needs. At one point, she turned to look at the smallest pup, who was struggling to keep up with its siblings. With a soft growl, she nudged it gently toward the warmth of the blankets, her maternal instincts clear in every gesture. But that's not all. When the storm finally began to weaken, the mother snow wolf stood up and stretched, signaling that it was time for her family to leave. She nuzzled each of her pups, urging them to follow her to the door. Evan opened it slowly, the cold air rushing in and making him shiver. The pups hesitated at first, their tiny paws sinking into the snow, their soft cries lost in the fierce wind. The mother snow wolf gently nudged them forward, her patience and encouragement unwavering. And listen to this. Before stepping out, she turned back to Evan and placed her paw on his arm. The touch was brief but powerful, a moment of connection that transcended species. Her eyes, filled with gratitude, seemed to convey a heartfelt thank you that no words could ever match. The family of snow wolves disappeared into the snowy forest, their forms blending seamlessly into the white landscape. Evan stood in the doorway, watching until they were out of sight. The silence that followed felt heavy but not empty. The warmth they had brought into his home lingered long after they had gone, leaving him with a newfound appreciation for the incredible intelligence and emotions of the wild animals he had always admired from afar. The encounter stayed with him, a story he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. A story not just of survival, but of trust, compassion, and the extraordinary bond between a man and the wild.